Buddy. Well,
Not much in my house.
I just moved to Camp Tillicum in Newberg, Oregon. So,
really?
yeah, we are working there over the summer. We got permission from the Oregon Some Government Agency to work as an emergency daycare program.
Oh, he's jumpy now. I just put my foot lightly on his tail, and he just bounced up.
So that I just muted Jessica's mic because I'm not sure something was coming over that. So Kelton, you're in Newberg?
That is correct.
And what is happening in so you're doing
my wife and I are working at Camp Tillicum. It is a day camp, and it is our summer job.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's very cool.
We are working as on-site, so we will be supervising the sorry for the shaky. The Wi-Fi here isn't spectacular.
Yeah, it happens.
But we are supervising the other day camp, and so children's and teenage counselors, as in those who are supervising children and those who are supervising teenagers.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
That sounds like supervising teenagers sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but right now it's just us and the other summer staff kind of isolating ourselves, but we can go outside and go on walks anytime we want to, so it sure beats an apartment.
Wow. Yeah. That's very cool.
Yeah. We went fishing yesterday and for a little bit before dinner. So
did you catch anything?
I caught a fish yesterday, and then another one took my lure, and then today Brittany caught her first fish ever.
Ooh, wow.
So
these like trout, is that what?
They at one point stocked the lake with bass, and if there was anything else in the lake, the bass ate it.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So wow. Okay. That's very cool. My goodness. I don't think I've been fishing forever and ever. I don't even know when the last time I went fishing was, but that's very cool.
Yeah, it was about, I think, 5 years for me until yesterday that I had been fishing. So
that's, well, you teach a man to fish and you feed him forever. So that's
as long as the fish bite, you can teach a man to fish, and he could just have poor luck, Kent. Or there could have never been fish in the lake.
That's true.
Oh my goodness. That gets deeper and deeper. Wow, man, that's good. Well, sweet. Yeah. So, so Kelta, you didn't graduate then officially, right?
I am doing the 5-year Christian ministry program at Corbin.
Okay.
So I'm going for my master's. So I'll still be around. I'll be a ghost on the campus, but I'll be there.
Well, I think everybody is a ghost on the campus now.
Especially right now. So
man, yeah, that's so crazy.
It was very tempting on Dead Week to not go to campus, because I ended up on campus in Dead Week, and I really kind of wanted to post this haunting video of Dead Week because obviously the campus was dead. But it was one of those moments where I was like, this is too soon. It's not like, it's not really funny. It's like still sad, but.
Yeah. It'll be funny someday or, so Kelton, are you officially not ASB president now, or does
as
your
of
reign
June
go
1st?
Oh,
my time is done. However, I will say that, and there's financially, because of the COVID-19, everything that happened, our budget was frozen. I'm supposed to snap my credit card in half. I've snapped my credit card in half. Either way, it doesn't matter because I can't use it. So financially, I really don't have any authority. I'm just operating as a spokesperson up until Toby Adeoye takes on the role.
So you could make all kinds of proclamations now, right? And
something like that.
This would be a good time for you to have a prophetic word that, that you are supposed to maintain your authority like prophets of certain cults.
Great idea.
And then
that
is it like presidents, the last thing they do is then they pardon a bunch of people for crimes, right? So you could pardon, like if somebody has parking tickets or something, maybe you could let those go.
Yeah.
You'd get reelected.
Yes, I would.
Well, cool. So anyway, so we're going to do a interview thing with Jordan and Kelton, and I'm going to ask hard questions and they're going to answer them. So Kelton, I've got a question for you first. So in your time so far at Corbin, what one or two lessons have been most valuable to you?
I am going to say, first, I'd like to give a shout out to Jordan Newton because this is directly related to him. I walked into my freshman Bible study methods class not knowing what was ahead of me. And Jordan, I believe, probably within the first week had said, the Bible will wreck you. And I found that to be the truth as I took my first semester being torn apart by the conviction of the Spirit in my life, and then seeing it to follow up the statement of the Bible will wreck you is that, but you find who you truly are and who you're meant to be in Christ, and saw that be restructured in my life and rebuilt. But the Bible will wreck me is probably one of the best lessons that I've learned, that if we're truly looking at Scripture, we get a sense of what conviction is in a very powerful, painful way.
Wow.
So if you want a second one, I can throw one out there, but that's always been something that's stuck with me.
So Jordan would, excuse me, it's not a COVID thing. It's just, I need to drink water thing. So I think, I don't know. Like I had to call the doctor for something, and the doctor's like, okay, we have to ask these questions. Do you have a temperature? No. Have you been around someone who's been diagnosed with the COVID thing? Like, no, I don't think so. She's like, well, have you been exposed to it? I'm like, probably. I think I don't know. And so I said no, because I figured that was the right thing to say. So I don't know. But anyway, so Jordan, so the Bible will wreck you. That sounds very provocative. What does that mean?
Somewhere in the beginning of Bible study methods, I talked about how the Bible ruins lives, and I talk about people that I've come across in life who are no longer Christian or who are quite decidedly anti-Christian. Visit a couple websites and we pull out stories, and a lot of times it's them having some issue with the Bible, and what I would probably add as a caveat, it's their interpretation of what particular passage mean or say. And we also talk about how Christians, the Bible can ruin your life for a good way. And I kind of talk about when I first realized God was calling me to something beyond the plan I had set for myself. And I can remember everything about that moment. But basically, the Bible ruined my life and called me into ministry. And then a lot of people in my sphere are no longer Christian or refuse to ever be Christian because of what they believe the Bible says or teaches. And so I tell them a lot comes down to how we read, how we understand Scripture. And so the Bible ruins lives. Wow.
So that's so a deconversion almost, like people. Yeah.
But usually how I kind of put a little bit of my story in there is I remember reading a passage in Ephesians, and I remember just having this devotional thought. And I remember realizing that before God created anything, he knew me and he had a plan for me. And that thought crushed everything I thought mattered. And it made me realize that all the things I was trying to do in high school weren't that meaningful, and that this new idea of God's profound bigness and love was bigger than all of that. And so in a lot of ways, it ruined things for me, because it's like, oh, I thought I was doing all these popularity rat race things. I thought, and not that we ever really leave all of that. I'm not saying that, but it definitely changed my junior and senior year. And I became kind of an evangelist at school, and there's ramifications for that too.
And wow. Yeah. So, because when you came to Corbin, you were on fire a little bit, right? If I remember right.
I don't know how to answer that question, but I remember feeling that Corbin is a really strange place, because I'd come from public school, kind of like Kelton, and coming to a Christian bubble was a very strange, like, I don't know what to do here. Like, all of us get this? what are we supposed to do? And I'm pretty sure that's what I sensed in Kelton as well. He's a Spokane guy.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that's Spokane. That's farm country, sort of.
That's Eastern Washington. Depends on where you are. I grew up in the suburbs.
Yeah. Ah, okay. I can tell that hair. Yeah, that's a suburb thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so George, so the Bible wrecks you, and then, so did the Bible wreck church for you, Jordan?
Oh, that's an interesting. So I feel like this is a setup, but yes.
And also, ways, we are live streaming, and there are people actually out there. So this is good. So if people are out there, please say something there's a chat thing there, and feel free to jump in and say hi, or say whatever, ask questions or something. So yes. So did you find anything in the Bible that confirmed what church was, or made church sound different than what you thought it was?
Yeah, I mean, I started a house church on accident, because I was trying to do what I felt like the New Testament said, which is kind of be on mission, go make disciples, share the gospel, love your neighbor. And out of that kind of was a workplace Bible study. And out of that workplace Bible study, I mean, we met at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. It was a bunch of non-Christians for the most part, or people who had deconverted from childhood. And so we met at, pretty late. A lot of people were smokers. We had smoke breaks for these Bible studies. A lot of them went to like 2 or 3 in the morning, not by design, but just because people lingered. And, out of that experience, we just read the Gospel of Mark together. That was my big idea. And everyone was still there at the end. And it was that sense of like, well, what do we do now? And some people had found faith in that, and other people had kind of are regrowing their faith. And so we decided that we should just read Acts as a way of continuing on. And it was pretty much every week we read something, we asked the question, should we do that? And so, early on in Acts, they're sharing meals, and it was this, should we do that? Well, they're worshiping. Should we have songs? And we slowly added stuff just because I didn't set out to do this. It's just what happened. And so, I was aware that something like this might happen, but yeah. And so out of that, and just starting with Acts and a group of people, we did not arrive at church that we see maybe, around us. But then again, aspects of like the way the West does church influenced how we read the book of Acts. So yes, the Bible did kind of ruin my experience of church, because I guess I imagine a much more community living together, doing life together, being on ministry together, and much less a show up for what Kelton and I refer to as the power hour.
Wow. So you shouldn't. So was one of the conclusions from looking at that sermons look different than how they look now in most churches?
I mean, I'm not sure that we saw a lot in Acts initially on sermons, but we had already started that everything was very discussion orientated. And so actually it was reading First Corinthians and learning that they had so many people trying to participate in the service that Paul famously says in First Corinthians 14, what I call the shut up passage. And he's like, prophets, there's way too many of you, shut up one at a time. Tongues, way too many of you, one at a time. And that's where he famously tells women to be silent. But what I zoomed out and said was there was so much participation in a gathering that it was chaos. And we have swung the other way to where only one person really gets to talk.
That's very cool. So so Kelton, did you notice the same thing kind of like in your church, like it's people just sit and observe, that sort of thing?
I think when I go to the point that...
And Kelsey said something. This is cool.
Hi,
you guys
Kelsey.
know Kelsey? Kelsey said hi. We're excited about Kelsey too. Anyway, yeah, Kelton.
All right. I think that I was like, when I go from the point where I come to Corbin, I interact with classes, I start to get a different shape. Jordan, I ended up taking a class with him called Rethinking Church. And basically Jordan just gave you a short explanation of what that class is. And I've thought a lot about what Jordan has said. I think part of it too is that I've looked to the theology, philosophy, and methodology of churches, and that comes a lot from Dr. Sam Baker. And then taking in certain factors of cultural dynamics by taking classes with Dr. Harrison, like intercultural communication, and started to realize that church is a very interesting thing. But I think that when we have to look to the theological aspect of it, of that church can look like a house church and church can look very different than house church, and they can both have a functioning theology that is scripturally oriented and fulfilling Christ's commission. I think what I started to notice is when I saw people show up to the power hour for their own good and the consumer mentality of the United States. I'm going to say this, and I understand I am but an undergraduate who's listened to a radical or someone like him. But when we sit in a chair and listen in an auditorium styled building that is meant for us to listen to a person, like almost, it's odd that there's a lot of similarities between a movie theater and the modern church in the way that they are structured. When we, and I believe that's talked about in the Juvenilization of American Christianity. That's a great book. Love that book. But I see this strange pattern of when we are so geared towards, Pastor, if you don't do things the way I want, the tithe is gone. Or I'm going to leave the church. And I think that there's this strange consumeristic mindset of the American church. And I think that's one of the more destructive things. And I think we lose community in that. I think that's one of the biggest pieces. There is no commitment to one another. There is no family. There is no engagement. Church becomes a business in the worst way possible, in the way that all of a sudden the church is operating based on how do we keep the people who are coming happy, but really we should be focusing on how do we prepare the people who are coming to church to go and make disciples for Jesus Christ. I think it's really interesting. Jordan, you've talked about this, but a lot of pastors sit behind desks for most of the time. You don't empower them to go if they're supposedly some of the most effective people for starting churches and for ministering, if they're trained up in that. And that's a perspective some people hold on why people go through ministry classes. Why are they behind desks? and I'd ask the question, why are congregants just sitting in chairs? Why is that the level you have to hit for Christianity, when I think that we have a gospel to where I'm very much now focused on, when I listen to a sermon, what does it mean for me to apply this in a way that I reflect Jesus Christ to the world and can go and make disciples, teaching them, like baptizing them and teaching them to obey what Christ has commanded.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen the shift where all of a sudden I'm less interested in how can it make me a better person, and how can this, like, what is the conviction that is on me to the body of Christ, and what is on me to go to those, my unbelieving neighbors and brothers and sisters in Christ, and the community around me, my neighbors, my peers, my associates.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I like that power hour thing, you know, and the idea of, or I don't like that. I mean, I like the way you're describing that. I think that makes sense. Because in the early church, I mean, right now, everything builds up to the sermon, and then you just sit and you listen to the sermon, then you leave. And in the early church, and I guess even in more liturgical churches now, everything builds towards Eucharist, you know, and it's like that, the participation of the community in taking the elements of communion, that is the key event in the service. It's not sitting and listening to something passive. It is you actively participating. You're eating the body of Christ, you're drinking the blood. And that's the highlight of the service, right? So it's all participation, and everyone's basically on the same level.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of us coming back to this larger subject of how do we learn, and what level of participation, you know, how does that factor into, maybe, I mean, our subject wasn't necessarily church, but I mean, if you really think about this, I mean, the church does sometimes, the average, what I would call a power hour, the average church service really does often amount to a lecture type space, where there is no assignments, homework, tests, quizzes, or graduation, which that's a whole nother topic. But I think churches ought to graduate people, but that's a whole nother schema.
Isn't that called catechesis?
Yeah.
You could argue that. I mean,
yeah.
You could say that when you look historically at the church, there was a point where catechesis was expected before baptism. For an understanding of what someone was being baptized into, what it meant to believe in Christ. And that has been lost in some sense today. Some may say that's a great thing. Some may say that's a bad thing, but that is the reality, that historically the church has partaken in some form of catechesis that does not function in the way that it does today, outside of maybe a class, that a 30-minute class after a service.
Yeah, because you had to pass a certain confirmation test, right? You had to be able to speak, you know, have those answers at hand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jordan, you did so your research, because it's Dr. Newton now. Did everyone know that? That is so cool. I think I saw your name on, I watched that graduation thing. And Kelton, you were there, right? At the graduation?
I was at the conferral as one of the speakers.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very surreal moment. Was it surreal for you too, to kind of be there?
It was weird to walk in, and it was lonely. I think it's okay to say it was lonely, that the Psalm Center, it was a very empty place because no one was there, but just that at a point where it's supposed to be often celebration, it just was quiet.
Yeah,
it felt weird to clap.
Yeah, it was like, it's like, I think, I mean, it was cool. I don't know. I don't think there is a right thing to do in those situations, because no one's ever written the script before.
Yeah.
But I did see Jordan's name go through there as a graduate along with Garrett, right? So that was cool. So Jordan, you did research, like part of your research was regarding this idea, right? Of participation, how do we learn, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I wanted to test with Corbin students what would be the largest cause of their spiritual growth over the 2018-2019 school year. And so I did a research project where I got participants to measure their spiritual formation. And I basically tried to create two groups of students: those who had a discipling relationship. Basically, they had somebody they met with regularly, could have been me, could have been anybody else, who met with them for their spiritual good, but it had to be a real relationship, somebody that they, not just that they were in a large group, but a person. And I measured between Corbin's students. Both groups had access to chapel, both groups had church, both groups had a Christian community. Some of them had Bible classes. But which group would grow more when all things were equal, but one group had a mentor or a discipler and the other group did not? Who grew more? And I obviously found out that students who have a discipling relationship outgrow students who don't by quite a big margin, which then led me to a lot of inquiry questions like, well, how many students do have a discipling relationship? How common is this? And then also asking other questions. Well, wait a minute. If I were to stack out all these causes, relationships with faculty and staff, or chapel or church, or the dorm experience or Bible classes, what's really causing people to grow? And if you want, I could throw up some of the graphs they're on. Yeah. I could get them off my drive.
Throwing up. I don't know if throwing up is a good idea, but yeah.
Yes, let me bring some of these up.
Does it give you that option? It should, right?
Oh, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll bring up the first of them right here, and I'm going to have to get into my screen share. Let's see if it's going to let me. Friendly heads up. Okay. Well, we're sharing the screen and audio.
All your personal, make sure your credit card is on there.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Are you seeing my PowerPoint? We're sharing the screen.
There it is. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to start this.
Make sure your credit card.
Currents. Okay. So this was based on my meetings with. Okay. This is out of my research. My participants. Some of them had a distinct relationship. Okay. So this was based on. Go ahead.
I think on that screen, do you have the YouTube thing up also?
No,
because it sounds like the sound is coming from, there's a sound coming from the screen too, I think.
Let me see. Has it stopped? I'm sorry.
Yeah, share your screen again. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it went away. So as it comes back, because I was getting a feed from like the live thing here. So let's see.
Oh geez, is this better?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Well, yeah, just real basically, a few things I found in my research was that students, when they voted for what contributed to their spiritual growth the most, the number one bar over here, this one was 16 votes. That was their faculty and staff relationships. The number 6 over here on the left-hand side was Bible classes. The 5 was church. The 3 votes was dorm life. And the 1 was chapel, actually. These are what students felt contributed to their growth the most by way of first place votes. If you gave their first place vote, more weight, their second, third, fourth, and on down the line, the order was actually still the same. And so when I gave students a voice on what was contributing most to their spiritual growth, they said over and over again, faculty and staff relationships.
Wow.
And a lot of other things could be pointed out here. I have some others over here. When I asked Corbin's students, how many of you are actually being discipled, the number that I came away with out of a couple of surveys was 21%. That seems to be about the going rate of how many students have discipleship. When it comes to our Corbin students really interested, I found consistently, and again, you can see sample size is 116. I found that, basically 70% say yes, they would love to be discipled by a Corbin faculty or staff. And this big gray number, by the way, this 29% is not no, it's I don't know. So there is a lot of people who would say yes right away. There's a lot of people who would be like, I don't know. And, out of 100, there's, basically 1% to 2% saying no, thank you. But what was interesting to me is that when I tested this at different points in the year, and I guess I'll get rid of the screen share, see if I can get back to it. As I tested this at the beginning of the semester, end of the semester with different groups of people, it didn't matter if it was the fall or the spring and which groups I was testing. It was almost always 68, 69, or 70% saying yes, they'd be interested. And so this was a very interesting finding, not only that a lot of Corbin students would like to have a relationship with faculty and staff that was like discipleship, spiritual investment, but it was also interesting that so few had it. And then at the end of my paper, of course, with my metrics and stuff, I found that students who had it grew more. And so it had this weird well, we're doing a lot of things as a university, but, in Bible classes, we're second most effective, but all the other stuff that we put time and energy in, maybe we would be wise to reinvest it and just making sure that the faculty and staff were more available to students. And this is where I'd kind of like to pass it off to Kelvin and say, what's the student perspective? Would you feel like my research, coincides with your experience? Did you have a faculty or staff relationship? Some of this I know, but I don't think our audience knows.
I think so. My student perspective is that students love professors. They engage with professors. They value open office hours for the reason of it's the closest thing you can get to developing that relationship with a professor. I don't think students feel enabled to disciple because they don't know what it looks like and they don't know what it means and they don't think they're mature enough. I remember talking with someone who I actually regarded as one of the most spiritually mature people I know. And saying hey, I think that the leaders of Corbin, people who are maturing, should be at a point where they feel comfortable discipling others, whether in their halls and not even RAs. And it's that we get this sense and start to drive that in, that this is something that we do as a university. And the student looked at me and said, yeah, I just really wish that, I really wish I could get to that point. And it was just this moment where, and I nicely yelled at him in a way of excitedly saying, you're there, you're ready. You are spiritually mature to the point to where there are people at this university who need someone like you to step into their life and interact with them and be there with them. And I understand the perspective. Professors have a lot going on. And Jordan, that's where I acknowledge how valuable it would be to make time to show. Corbin University says it is a discipleship university, and I want to see that in intentional, meaningful, directed time. And for me, I feel like it's too late. And I feel like I've missed out in that. And I can say that as I finish my junior year, I've gone through student leadership and I've struggled and I've suffered. And I don't mean this to criticize, but the student leaders at Corbin University, a lot of the time, walk out burnt out. Mm-hmm. And if someone wants to be frustrated about that, I can tell you just down the line of student presidents, there's been a lot of burnout. And a lot of it has to do with they feel that there's a sense that they're at the top of what they're doing, that they're trying to help, they're trying to guide the people who they are serving. And there's no discipleship relationship that they experience. And it leads to that spiritual burnout. It leads to that heavy burden. And I think that one of those ways students want it. Jordan, your numbers say it. I think as a student, I want to feel that it's accessible, but it's really hard when a professor says, how busy they are and that they aren't accessible. And I don't mean to criticize professors in that. I understand. I can acknowledge that. And I wish that there was time. I wish that the advisor system was not just kind of a thrown together thing. I'm going to say it, a thrown together thing that's used to try to be a discipleship relationship, but ultimately just yields more stress for professors, more stress for students, damages the independence of a student because they can't figure out how to register for themselves.
Mhm.
And ultimately just allows for the, okay, well, there's someone who could be checking in with them, but that doesn't happen. And again, I'm not here to criticize the professor because it's
That's really good.
impossible.
Yeah.
It's too hard. The burden, the split that goes on, the class load.
So because I think that is so profound. I think what you're saying is so right on, and it's John Mark Comer has recently written a book about the urgent. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's kind of a concept of how there's this thing called hurry sickness, that we're just so busy doing stuff that we never really get anything done. And being busy is one of the biggest enemies of a spiritual, healthy life, where you're just constantly running, right? And every time I kind of fall into that, like, oh, I'm really busy. Something inside of me just cringes because it's like, no, that's not a healthy place to be. It's kind of falling into the world's definition of what's good, because the world's definition is the busier you are, the more productive you are, and the better person you are. Whereas I think, Kelton, you hit it right on the head, that a spiritual, healthy being isn't defined by rushing and being busy and being overloaded. That I think we've missed the mark there in a lot of ways.
I would also say that some of this problem of discipleship is maybe that we attempt discipleship through really impersonal means, which sometimes is classes or books or seminars or just like principles to do it yourself. And what we see in scriptures is it's a very relational process, and it's really, coming back to almost an apprentice mindset, that to learn this craft of the Christian life, somebody passes it on to you, and you learn by watching them, getting involved in the project with them coaching you, you trying and failing, them telling you about their first time doing this, of course you failed, and then having this kind of relationship of instruction where they go out and do it on their own, and they come back and you talk about it and people progress. But that doesn't exist in a busy world. We shrink it into an hour a week here on this spot, and it's it becomes pretty impersonal, inorganic, and I would argue pretty ineffective. And so I've been wondering kind of more and more if the relationship component is maybe the most important, at least for us in the West in this century, to get right. That it's a personal thing. It's somebody, not just a thing or an organization, but it's someone who actively takes interest in your spiritual good, somebody who becomes basically a spiritual friend, which is still a friend, but it's a friend who's working in this direction with you.
So, Kelton, if you could redesign, and it's like, okay, which maybe this whole weird COVID thing is, that maybe that's what it's helping to do. Could be. We'll
find out.
How would you redesign student government, or like faculty accessibility, that kind of stuff? Are there some principles?
I think that replication, in Jordan, it's something you touch on within the model of the discipleship program that you discussed, because I went to your presentation. One of the things that I really enjoyed is that this discipleship model is to be built on replication. And what that means is that it does not make sense to say that every professor has the ability to disciple, that every student will be matched up with the professor, in the way of there are a lot of students and not a lot of professors. that time just doesn't exist. Like, we're praying that God stops the sunset at that point, because it's a huge task. But if you can take students who are being discipled and say, all right, now that you're done with this, now that our time is up, and as Jordan would put it, you've graduated, we've spent time together, you need to go and do the same.
Mm-hmm.
What is, like, as strange as it is, Christ gives the Great Commission to his disciples and says, go and make disciples. Well, what are the disciples going to do? They're supposed to go and make disciples. And I think that if we can understand that at Corbin, I'm like being within a real realm. It starts out with 40 students or 50 students. And there is in it more intensive piece. It is more of a weekly check-in. In my opinion, I think monthly doesn't work. I don't think that the interaction is enough. I think we need to, discipleship comes from this idea of life sharing. Christian discipleship comes in with, this is my life. This is what it looks like to live as a Christian, because Christianity, we need to practice throughout all that we do. If we aren't demonstrating that, I think there's an issue. I think sometimes that means going over to dinner at your professor's house,
Mm-hmm.
or if you can sit in during office hours and do homework in their office. And at first that's weird, but we're supposed to have that level of interaction to see how they live.
Yeah.
And then once that period is done, whether it be a year or 2 years, you say, you've done this program. You know what it looks like to live as Christ. You've seen me live as Christ. As Paul says, be like me as I am like Christ in 1 Corinthians 11:1. I love that verse because it's discipleship. So now that you've seen me live as Christ, go and live as Christ did to others and start the process over. Because let's say every professor has 5 students, or you start with a smaller group and every professor has a 5 group, like discipleship group. 10 professors do it. You have 50 students and all of them are expected. That part of this discipleship process is that you go and do the same. You're going to grow. You're going to multiply. It's going to be huge growth, but you have to drill that in and you have to make that a feature. That needs to be, as weird as it is, there is an end goal of starting again. Not in the way of, congratulations, you're a mature Christian now. Like, you're like, can't tell the difference between you and when you're fully glorified. Like, no, it's, you're now at a point where you know what it means to do this. Go and do this.
Right.
So Kelton, you had mentioned like another student was saying that they didn't feel ready to disciple somebody else. Why would a student believe that? Maybe not that person in particular, but
I would say part of it is the professional theologian aspect of the United States in one way. I don't have to do it because the pastor will. I've heard the awful statement, and if someone hears me and they've heard this from the pulpit of, you bring them and I'll convert them. Like, I'm sorry, but that's not the gospel. You're like, as a Christian, you are like commissioned by Christ to go and do that, to go and live, to give your testimony in how you live and how you act. That responsibility falls on the believer and the community of Christ at the same time. I think that person thought, I'm not a professional. I'm not the pastor. I'm not the evangelist. I'm not the missionary. I'm not the professor. And so that switch of, I'm not the professional comes in. But when we
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that once we start to realize that there's is that me?
That, I think you're good.
Okay. I just see a moment where we, as believers, need to realize discipleship is for the believer, not for the pastor, not for the missionary, not for the evangelist. It is for the believer. It is for the disciple of Christ. And when we start to pursue that and have that as the narrative, I think that's the biggest piece. When that is the narrative, that there's a change that happens. Because again, this student was there. They were mature enough. They were at the point where there were young believers who could have benefited from that discipleship process, or their friends who they were ministering to who didn't know Christ, but in a way they had started that discipleship process to their unbelieving friends. There just wasn't a title to it, because there's a confidence that comes in that of, you're doing it. Like, yes, good job. And honestly,
even whether you're aware of it or not, you're still doing it, right? In one way or
yes.
another. Yeah.
But I think we lack the ability to thrive in the full potential of, we see the Great Commission and we're scared of it because we don't understand what it is. And part of it is, who in your life are you inviting in to see what it means to live like Jesus Christ?
Now you're preaching. Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, again, I think every believer has the ability to do it. Like, we understand what it means to live like Christ. We look at his life. We have the guide of how Christ lived in Scripture. We have the community of Christ to see the people who can guide us. And as they practically live it out within our culture, within our world, within our communities, do it. I think that's the thing at Corbin. And I think in my conferral speech, I tried to say that of, like, the economy's bad. Like, we're not going to lie. The economy's bad. The job market is going to be not a lot for sale going on right now. Like, not a lot is going on, but we are in a different economy as believers, where we see that there is a spiritual hunger in this world. Go and make disciples. Go. Like, the world needs it. We're hopeless right now. We're in despair. Like, if we could say to the believers or the students at Corbin who even spend a semester saying, you're more mature, there are people around you who are going to be hopeless, go and be light to them, go and be salt. I think there's something powerful about that. And I think that the graduation process is shorter than I'd even say. I think we start and we get there in that it continues in this strange pattern. Again, you never truly graduate, but there's a point where you are able, you are prepared, you are ready, now go. And I think that if we realize that even during this time, we're in a very powerful position.
That's good. That's and the idea of being of pastors and stuff, right? I mean, even that is that whole idea of what a pastor is more cultural than biblical, I think, in today's world, where a pastor's more of a CEO than a shepherd, probably. So Jordan's been a pastor. Jordan is a pastor. Everybody's like, because you were like officially a pastor. Are you still?
Yeah.
I mean,
I would say that I verb pastor more than I noun pastor. Though I would say that also a number of people might see me as a pastor to them. I am not shepherding a congregation for which I am responsible right now. No, I was a house church pastor for 10 years, but with adopted kids and life changing, my wife and I transitioned out of that. I still keep contact with a lot of those people, but I would see my primary place of shepherding as with Corbin students, and particularly with people who I have committed relationships of that sort, of discipling relationships with. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And you, Kent, you have been Pastor Kersey for a while. When I met Kent, he was called PK because he was actually Pastor Kersey.
Yeah, campus pastor back when they used to have that. That was I think that was an important position. Not that I necessarily did it that well, but just having a kind of a prophetic voice in the university that was able to speak into things. it's kind of sad not to have that, because I think that's an important position. Yeah. That's good. That's good. So Jordan, do you have anything that we didn't say that needs to be said?
Well, I might put a little bit of a bow on some of the things that have been shared by talking again kind of about the model of whether we're talking about church or your own family or Bible study group or even what Corbin does. Sometimes I think our problem as the West is that we just don't maybe do the personal piece, or maybe seeing it, the problem differently is that we just don't put expectations or accountability on people. And so I think sometimes, to you asking Kelton this question earlier, why would a student not feel ready to disciple? And I would say because it's never been expected of them that they disciple. The model of church is just that you go and you either participate a lot or a little. It's up to you. You know, and you can kind of serve here and there. You know, if you want to, you can volunteer if you want to, if you have time. And it's kind of a la carte, and maybe you build contacts with people who challenge you and push you. That would be more of the exception than the rule. But I mean, I've just seen models, not from around the world, but just being in contact with people from other places, particularly the one that I'll mention is in India, of just, you know, people come to know Jesus in like a Bible study group. And the very next week, you know, they're out supposedly sharing their testimony, and within 2 or 3 weeks, they're starting their own groups of just their family and friends who are not believers, just getting them. They're getting onboarded and they're being baptized into a culture of I'm supposed to do things, and that's part of how they learn from somebody else, and that's what they pass on. And I think the problem maybe from where I'm coming from in the West, in the Northwest, with only the churches that I've worked with, experienced, and even led myself, is we tend to pass on a culture where very little is expected. And I'm not really sure what to say about that, other than that we've gotten pretty far from disciples making disciples. But I think a student says, you know, I can't disciple because it hasn't been expected of them, probably because they haven't had a disciple in their life themselves. And that's also why I think if you ask professors to disciple, while some of them candidly, quietly, and maybe in an email will tell you, I don't think I should disciple, I'm not there yet. And that's when we're talking about pretty mature adults feel that way. So of course, students feel that way too. And I think Kelton spoke to maybe the professionalization or just the theology breadth that we expect everybody to know. And so we start to feel like we don't know enough, we aren't enough, we're not good enough at something to do it. But I think it just comes down to whatever you have, pass it on. There's somebody to your left, somebody to your right, whatever you have, just pass it on. I often talk about being a river instead of a lake. A lake continues to grow water and gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and that's not helping anybody unless you're at the lake. But basically, the river is whatever comes into my life, whatever I'm learning, I'm passing it down to somebody else. I got to get this out to somebody else. Whatever God spoke to me at chapel, church, Bible study group, whatever, it's meant for me and to give to the next person.
And that brings us back to fishing. That's kind of like it was kind of like a bookend thing that, So Kelty, this is really interesting because every year at the beginning of the semester, we get like an email from Student Life saying, if you're interested in mentoring, and so that is an invitation to faculty, like if you want to mentor somebody. And a lot of times it's people who have been in trouble for something, a lot of times, you know, and they're under like discipline for something. And it's like, okay, you can jump in and fix this person with mentoring. And like, man, mentoring, I don't know how to do that. But there's not really an invitation to disciple, which is interesting, right? Maybe that's something that we as faculty need to instigate and start. Yeah.
Students will come. And I mean it. I recently sent an email to Dr. Baker where I just expressed that I just had this realization of how important he's been. Like the classes that I've taken with him, the way that he's approached ministry, have been really impactful for me. And I know other students feel like this sense of, I don't know if there's a right word. There's just this powerful sense of, you have done something that truly helps me, and I want to express that. I think to anyone who hears this, we need to tell our professors that. We need to tell the people who are investing in us that it's valuable. I honestly think that's part of it.
That's helpful. Yeah.
I think that it goes,
I would say that when I talk to the professors, one of the things that I share with them based out of my research was that students, there's a lot of students who are interested, and they immediately say, well, then why is nobody asking me if they're so interested? There's this skepticism that students are interested. And I have then, from the interview process with students, realized there's a couple of things here. Students don't know who to ask. They don't really know who to go to. They know that there are people that they're drawn to. As you've mentioned, you're drawn to Dr. Baker. Other people are drawn to different professors. They kind of know who they're drawn to, but they don't exactly know who to ask, and they don't really know what to ask, because they're not really asking, necessary for another Bible study. They're not really sure like what to say. Like, I want you to invest in me. It's kind of an awkward thing to ask. And if you ask students, most of them say, shouldn't they ask me? It's kind of like a who asks who here. And so I've tried to help professors see, I guess a couple of, in conversations when I've talked, I'm not advising anybody on this, but I've learned to start recognizing when students are hanging around consistently after class, when they're stopping by, like to invite them in and figure out, what else is getting you to this place that you're looking at me and coming to me? Are you looking for really, are you looking for some kind of, something more than just friendship, in the sense of something more than friendship? That's probably bad for the YouTube crowd. Let me back that up and say, are you looking for, I guess, mentorship?
Or as Dr. Baker would say, you just love on students, right?
Yeah.
That's
never.
Yeah. It's kind of funny though. It's Christian, it's Christian lingo that Christians don't know how to use. Because I really don't see the word mentor pop up that much. I don't see the word like coach pop up in scripture. But you see the word disciple, and it's this word that we're so comfortable with, insane, but we don't know how to use it. We really don't know how to use it, especially within our own lives, which again, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
For something that's so central to the New Testament and to the Gospels, we're very uncomfortable applying the word disciple to our life.
That's really helpful. So what would, like, if a professor wanted to open up to a group of students and say, hey, I know, we're in this theology class, but I'm going to be doing, it's hard to invite 40 people over for dinner. And it's easy to invite 40 people over for dinner. It's not easy to actually fit. Like, I think we've had like 20 people over before, and our house is just weirdly shaped, and it's hard to get many people around. What kind of thing could a professor do to invite maybe that deeper level of just hanging out and
I think availability is part of it. Have time slotted out where that is available for a student.
So we have a comment from Wolfsbane. Do you know who that is, Kelton?
I don't, but they probably have a wolf.
That's it. But they obviously, this person's obviously smart, because they gave you some props for coming up with that.
Thank you. I don't know. Like, I think that professors, part of it's availability. Part of it is it can start with, it's kind of the weird conversation, right?
So Kelton is Joseph.
Hi, Joseph.
Oh, is this Joseph, like Joseph we know? We all know?
I think so.
Okay. We need to have, yes, we need to have him on. And unless it's the Joseph we don't know, and then we need to run the other way. So,
I mean, he spelled my name right, so I'm going to guess he does. And if this is
Yeah.
the Joseph I'm thinking of, then I owe him a. Oh.
Well, while the teacher is away, the kids will be playing, right?
Yes. To summarize my point, because my phone's going to die. Oh, he's back.
Yeah,
Welcome back.
There's a thing you hit and it kicks you out, and then anyway. Yeah, so go ahead and finish.
Professors making the time available, understanding it is a weird thing. Like, hey, like, do you want to be discipled? Like, just say it. It's okay. It is a weird thing to say, but we have to get used to it. We have to get comfortable with it because it is a strong word. It's a powerful word. We look at what discipleship is, and it carries so much weight to it, and it carries this threat of vulnerability, right? You're going to interact and see what it looks like for me, like to go over to my house, and I may be wearing sweats. I know that's weird, but you're welcome into my life in that way.
My Adidas tracksuit. Yes.
Yeah. Like, I think that we look for that, and it starts with just look for the student who's willing. And Jordan, it's true. If you have a student who's waiting after class and they look awkward,
dead giveaway.
100%.
But
100%.
Kelton, I would argue back a little bit with you and say, I, as a professor, would not ever say to somebody who's just in my class who hangs out, are you looking to be discipled? I feel like that's like, you having this friend who's a girl and you're like, are you looking for a forever intimate friend? It's like, it's a little too forward. And so maybe I get what you're saying. I would say, hey, do you want to get coffee? Do you want to go for a walk? And then it's like, hey, do you want this to be a regular thing? And then sometimes you
looking
get
for a student of peace. Looking for a person of peace, Jordan. You're looking for a student of peace who's like, yes, I will take some time to hang out with an old person. Yes,
yeah, right.
I will take.
Or a mask and a gloves.
Coffee. Yeah, like I think you do look for. I think that you're right. There has to be some level of, hey, I noticed that you're coming by the office and that you're hanging around after class. You want to get coffee sometime and talk?
Yeah.
Because I think the relationship could end up pointing in that direction. And like, this is a discipleship relationship where I'm going to show, like, I'm in a position where it just makes sense for that to be a step.
Right. And I've had students who've wanted to hang out and have coffee, and they even made it a weekly thing. And 3 or 4 times in, they're just asking questions, we're dialoguing. And all of a sudden I'm kind of like, are you looking for more than just you coming and hanging out? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, would you rather talk about like spiritual things? And like, I don't know, like, are you looking to be challenged and like grown? And they were all kind of like, yeah, I guess so. Like, I don't know. I mean, I want to come hang out, but yeah, I am looking for, and so sometimes you can be indirect. Sometimes I just am trying to figure out, what is the student after? I mean, are they just looking for someone to talk to about life stuff, ask theological questions because I'm a Bible teacher, or Kent is as well? Or maybe it's like, are you looking for like challenge towards growth? And so sometimes like, okay, because that's a totally different meeting, because now I want to ask you about like, what do you think God's been telling you to do, and challenge you to do it and do about it. And that's a totally different thing.
It is.
Wow, this is good. And I think this is a good launching point, because we're going to talk about discipleship and dig into that a little bit next time. And so, so Kelton, are you available in the future for,
if it's after 5, I tend to be free.
Okay.
Well, it looks like we could get
the next few weeks.
Well, why not? We could also bring in Kelsey and Joseph, who've identified themselves. Maybe they'll want to be on the call, and we can start with these 3 maybe, and maybe we should get into working definitions of what a disciple is and what is discipleship. That could be pretty fascinating. Kent, you have a
That would
video
be-
coming out, right? You've got episode 2 to Chapalogue
Yeah,
next week.
people are already in line. I noticed that the tickets have sold out already, and it's kind of like Hamilton. People just can't get tickets to it, but we will try to upload our bandwidth and be able to see if we can get this out. Yes, and Amanda says thanks for sharing. This is good.
Amanda.
I think I've had Amanda in class. Did I have Amanda in class? Amanda's one of those names where there are a lot of Amandas, but not as many as Hannah's or Jessica's. Like I've been in a class where half the girls are Hannah, half are Jessica, and so that name sounds so familiar. Amanda, have you been in one of my classes? Oh, now Kelsey says, yes, thank you. This has been good. Lots to think about. So, so we will maybe throw out an idea. Yeah. And so we're going to dig a little bit deeper into this idea of discipleship. And I think Kelton, you kicked it off perfectly, about like, defines who we are more than a label of like Christian or Baptist or non-Baptist or whatever, or Calvinist or Arminian, which are important words, but they aren't in the Bible like disciple is. So yeah. Yes, very good. And then Kelsey says, we already saw that one. Yes. So this is good. Yeah. So we've got enough people to start a revolution now, I think. So this is good. All right. Well, hang in there, guys, and hope you catch a lot of fish, Kelton, and
Hope
both physically and metaphorically, maybe. Yeah.
And if you want to start a discipleship revolution, it's not as simple as asking for more discipleship. It's you going, who can I pass something on to, right? Mm-hmm. And so I hope that's the practical takeaway. And that's also part of our Chapalogue experience with the Padlet link and some of the other options for studying and going further is maybe there's people in your life who you can be passing things along to a little more intentionally and a little less just like throwing things here and there, but just going, hey, let's talk about this. So here's to hoping.
That's a good bow on top of it. So thank you guys. And we will stay in touch. And so have a good week. Yeah. Stay safe. Wash your hands, wash your feet, wash your elbows, wash all that stuff. That needs wash.
Planning on it.
Like I know what I'm talking about.
Especially
like,
the elbows.
It could be that actually washing your hands makes it worse. I don't know. And
I think we know that that's not true. I think we can say we know that.
Okay. Well, I'm a dude. I don't want to wash anything. So yeah. All right. Have a good one, guys. And we will see you soon. Right. Bye.